Welcome.
He wants something, and he's willing to go to any lengths, any heights, travel at any speed, through the most terrifying twists and turns to get it. The Phantom's Revenge is now open, so there's no turning back.
Revenge will be mine.
Is there a more famous story in the coaster world than the story of Phantom's Revenge? The record-breaking Arrow Hyperlooper Reborn as an inversionless airtime machine after less than a decade of operation has been hailed as the ultimate rags-to-riches story, winning over the hearts and minds of coaster enthusiasts the world over. Praise is heaped on this unique ride year after year, many continuing to tout it as the best coaster in the state, even in the face of stiff, more modern competition. Is this deserved? More importantly, what is it that makes Phantom so lauded? What the hell happened in this ride's twisted and bizarre history that led to such a compelling product? To borrow a turn of phrase, well...
How did I get here?
Actually, let's talk about how I got here for a quick second. Since I started this channel, a lot of people have asked me how I developed my love for roller coasters, and thankfully for me, there is a straightforward answer. The seeds for my obsession were planted decades ago, all the way back in 1998. My parents, aunt, uncle, cousins, and I trekked down all the way from New York City to Williamsburg, Virginia, and I just made the cut to plop my 4-year-old tush into the trains of the venerable Big Bad Wolf. One ride later, I was hooked. Nessie, my first looper, followed in rapid succession the next year, and it was game over from there. As soon as I could, I had conquered every coaster at Busch Gardens Williamsburg, proudly donning my Fear to 4 t-shirt as I slayed B&M behemoths like Apollo's Chariot and Alpengeist. I felt like the king of the world. Still, amid the childlike ecstasy, I could sense there was something missing, something else out there. My suspicions were confirmed when we hopped on the train tour and I feasted my eyes on a well-hidden electric blue behemoth tucked away in the corner of the park. It looked stunning, a twisted mess of track featuring crazy elements that I had never seen before. I furiously pressed the park employee on the train, impatiently inquiring about this seemingly brand new coaster and wondering why I had never heard of it. She refused to acknowledge me. And in these pre-internet days, I was resigned to treat this coaster as a fever dream which somehow seeped into the depths of my subconscious. A discrepancy easily explained by an overactive childhood imagination. Then I found out it was real. Now you're probably wondering why I started a video about Phantom's Revenge by discussing Dragonfire, but much like BGW's true Loch Ness Monster, Phantom's predecessor lives on in a similar plane, as a lost experience, a coaster cryptid. Remnants of the old Steel Phantom still remain, but they are warped and twisted to such a degree that it's nearly unrecognizable. The comically tight inversions that broke necks in the previous decades have long since returned to the Earth. Outside the minds of Yinzers and sweaty obsessed arrowheads, Steel Phantom is comfortably resigned to the back burner of history. We've accepted this history because we've lived in it for so long to the point that we gloss over just how insane that is. Steel Phantom and Dragonfire, headlining attractions of the early 90s that pushed the roller coaster further into the future, both opening to rave reviews and proudly standing as flagships of their respective parks. 10 years later, they were gone. This is almost unprecedented in the coaster world, but let's dip our toes into the Twilight Zone for a second and meet the ghost of the Arrow Hyperlooper in its ethereal resting place. Was this the fate that Steel Phantom deserved? Or does Phantom's Revenge, Frankensteined into a distorted, ferocious facsimile of its former self at the dawn of the new millennium, fulfill the aborted promise of its forebearer? I don't know, I never rode Steel Phantom.
It's like this and like that and like this and Drake creep to the mic like a fan.
Back to the real world. Standing in front of us all these years later is Phantom's Revenge, and good news, the ride is still weird. So fucking weird. It may not quite match the insanity of the original, but lucky for us, Kennywood's bastard child hyperconversion remains a wholly singular experience over 2 decades later. Nowhere else will you find butchered Arrow Looper trains restraining riders through intense ejector airtime with what basically amounts to a pool noodle. Nowhere else will you see a 200-foot long section of straight track pointed southward, beckoning you down towards the bottom of a ravine. Nowhere else will you see the blueprint for the RMC conversion laid out for all to see in the rusty hills of Steelers country, beating Shilkey to the punch by a full decade. And this tracks. Even before its surgical transformation at the hands of Dr. Morgenstein, Steel Phantom was like nothing else. But should we be surprised? This is Kennywood we are talking about. The whole park is about the size of an NBA player's shoe. The park has made a name of itself over the past 125 years by working with its terrain to develop some truly unique coasters. Even their more traditional rides are molded by the dictates of Kennywood's cramped and rugged landscape. It's 1990 and Kennywood wants a hypercoaster? Well, no way you're plopping down a Magnum clone with this land to work with. To even pass the 200-foot threshold, Harry Henninger, the legendary former CEO of Kennywood and certified badass, had to think outside the box. And what he came up with was a stroke of genius. What if, instead of going up 200 feet vertically, the coaster hit the hyper mark by shooting down the ravine?
And one night I was dreaming and said, but if you put the 200-foot drop in the middle of the ride, you don't build up additional energy and you overcome two problems. And I came out the next morning and went straight and looked at the Thunderbolt and ordered some gateway engineering surveying done to see if the idea was possible. And it was.
Hey guys, thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed what you're seeing so far, please give the video a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. As a smaller YouTube channel, it's really hard for me to pierce through the YouTube algorithm, but every like, every comment, and every subscription really helps. Thanks so much, and enjoy the rest of the video. Now, on the face of it, it seems that cramming a hypercoaster into tiny, money-strapped Kennywood was a terrible idea in the first place. Why does Kennywood need a hyper? Why do you still try to cram yourself into your favorite college shirt you outgrew 30 pounds ago just to walk around town looking like George Costanza? It's time to admit that you're too big for this. But it's easy to overlook if you're not a local that Kennywood was and is in direct competition with Cedar Point, only 3 hours away. So it's sensible that Kennywood wanted to steal the headlines. The new ride needed to shatter the height and speed records set by Magnum XL 200 2 years earlier. We Pennsylvanians weren't going to let goddamn Ohio get away with it. The more baffling decision, no doubt, was to make the new world's fastest coaster a multi-looper. There was no need to add inversions to Arrow's and the world's literal second hyper, especially given Kennywood's land situation and Arrow's design philosophy. I thought for a while that this was Arrow designer and coat hanger extraordinaire Ron Toomer's brainchild, because that seems like something he would think up. There isn't enough room to put the loop 100 feet in the air like you did with Viper, Ron. But then, straight from the man itself, I heard that it was Henny's idea.
At the time, I was very fortunate that I got to go ride a lot of things, so I went out to Magic Mountain, and the Viper was out there, and there were two aspects of the Viper that I particularly cared for. One was the sweeping turn off of the lift. I thought that was a wonderful, gut-wrenching sensation. And the other thing was that they did have, it was the time of inversions, loops, and corkscrews, and a few others were, boomerangs were in vogue, and it just seemed like that would be, again, you eat up a lot of energy in inversions that you don't in flat track.
Now, longtime viewers of the channel know that I have an unhealthy obsession with Viper, my favorite roller coaster and one of my 3 true loves, tied with Magnum XL 200 and my dog. Let's put aside my biases for a second and look at Viper from a more objective standpoint. Even outside of the insular world of Arrow devotees, most enthusiasts tend to agree that Viper is one of, if not the, smoothest Arrow loopers out there. For a myriad of reasons that I will get into eventually when I release my Viper video that I've been working on in fits and starts for like a year, Viper's creation was basically the perfect storm of layout changes, design improvements, and plain old luck to culminate in a well-tracking machine that is shockingly devoid of the infamous
Arrow transitions
that were legion on the other mega loopers. It's hard to fault Henny for falling in love with maybe the greatest looping coaster ever created, but had he ridden Shockwave at Great America instead of Zaddy Viper, the course of history may have taken a slightly different track. You all know what's coming up. The loops are in and Arrow is making it. I can hear the screams of terror from here. Maybe the upcoming complaints of roughness could have been eluded altogether if Kennywood decided to go with a different company to build their record breaker. but I've run out of coins to put in the what if machine, so I guess we'll never know. The reality is, and this is something that may trigger a rabid RMC fanboy thuzies that have no interest in any coaster built before 2015, so I will distract you with this video of a delightful RMC pre-lift in the bottom left corner. Henny wanted Arrow to do the job.
At the time, they were the leading developer. It was before Dana Morgan, it was before B&M. We had gone through a roller coaster that was Intamin, but built by Schwarzkopf, which was the laser loop. And anytime you do something, cutting edge technology, you wind up with some bruises. And so let's just say that our relationship with Arrow was closer at that moment.
First off, his vendetta against Schwarzkopf is hilarious. And secondly, Arrow was the go-to for a project like this. No one else had made a hypercoaster. Literally, Magnum was the only one in existence. And in 1990, Arrow was at the height of their powers, having just produced their magnum opuses, Magnum and Viper, back to back. Both are still thrilling riders decades later, unlike many other Arrows made both before and after that are no longer with us. The only other company in the hyper conversation was Togo, but like, come on, you're gonna pick Togo for this? Yeah, that's what I thought. Intamin's most recent project in America was a bobsled in a cage. B&M, well, they were about to pop onto the scene with a teensy little drop in 2 inversions and a goddamn stand-up coaster. Go big or go home, it's gotta be Arrow. Ah, but hindsight is 20/20, Henny? The gift of time allows us to see how crazy this idea truly was, especially as we begin to see the gargantuan steel structure that is Steel Phantom make its mark on the rolling Pittsburgh terrain. Too late though. I guess Kennywood will have to learn their lesson the hard way, or maybe not, given that they would proceed to make the same mistake a few decades later. If Magnum looked ambitious a few years before, Steel Phantom was about to yell "Hold my beer" before belly flopping right off the diving board. And belly flop it did, opening to horrid reviews as newscasters and enthusiasts the world over were grounded into a pulp by the black and iron meat mincer that was Kennywood's greatest indignity. So fine, we fucked up. What do we do now? Steel Phantom was meant to be the symbol of Kennywood, but the final product was so dreadful that it could only serve as a symbol to a monumental fuck-up. The already poor reputation of the ride continued to tumble year after year, and in a fit of desperation, Kennywood was forced to salvage their massive investment by turning to D.H. Moore. Oh wait, every last statement in that last paragraph was a complete lie. People loved the damn ride.
It's the best coaster, steel coaster I've ever been on. This is my personal favorite.
And these guys ought to know. They're local members of the American Coaster Enthusiasts, invited for a test run of the Phantom.
Sure, it was rough, like remove the earrings from your face if you want to live rough. But it was also unique, iconic, forceful, and absolutely unhinged. Scores of interviewed acers fawned over the Phantom on opening day, claiming it to be the most intense coaster ever made. It continued to get positive coverage, and even in its final years, the newly created Golden Ticket Awards were proud to present Steel Phantom with near top 10 finishes in both 1998 and 1999.
The number 4 coaster on the countdown is the sleek Steel Phantom. This speed machine makes its home, appropriately, in the heart of Steel Country, at Kennywood Park in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
When the Phantom met its shocking demise, there was an outcry from locals and enthusiasts alike, as Kennywood was literally flooded with protest letters hoping to save the proud patron of Pittsburgh. How could we give up on Steel Phantom so soon? It's time to fast forward though. Step out of your E30, put down the Sega Genesis, and stop listening to vintage cassettes unironically. Steel Phantom belongs to a world that doesn't exist anymore. Somewhere, someone cooked up the absolutely insane idea to morph the carcass of this still relatively new Hyperlooper into something very different. From the ashes of its predecessor, the Phantom would have its revenge.
Revenge will be mine.
Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed part 1 of what will be a 2-part series all about Phantom's Revenge. I originally planned for this to be a single, shorter video, but after my voiceover crossed the 30-minute mark, I realized I had to do something different in order to get the video out in a reasonable time. Thank you to everyone who responded to the poll. Given that most people didn't care, and the YouTube algorithm is a hungry monster that always demands more content, I figured that splitting the video into 2 parts was the way to go. For those of you who did want to watch the whole thing as one 30-minute long video, I will release an extended cut after the second video is released sometime later in the month. Please subscribe to the channel and like the video if you haven't. It really means the world to me as a very small YouTuber who's still struggling to meet their content goals. And with your help, hopefully we can finally cross the first barrier to monetization so I can start getting some money out of these videos. Thanks so much, and see you soon.